My name is Alex Pierce. The story occurred in 1992, when I was about 11 years old. We lived on 18970 Pritchard Place in Cerritos, California, in a two-story split-level home where my brother, Dylan, and I slept in neighboring rooms upstairs. My brother was known for his wild imagination and would constantly make up stories, but he was actually asleep when this particular incident occurred. Before I go into full detail explaining what happened that night, I will tell you that my brother actually claimed he had a clownish, imaginary friend and constantly referred to him as if he were an actual human, even offering him food at the dinner table. I usually thought it was a mere childish gesture. My mother and I would just watch him and contentedly play along. On February 7th, Friday, my brother woke up in the middle of the night, claiming that a clown was playing peekaboo with him from the window and told me that it was funner with more people. I had no idea what he was talking about and quite honestly scared, but I held his hand, turned on the lights, and entered his bedroom. "Look!" he exclaimed, pointing at the window. "It's the clown." He just stood there, pointing, laughing, but I was completely dumbfounded. No one was at the window, and even when he claimed the clown was speaking, I couldn't hear anything. I assumed he was merely sleep-talking and motioned him back into bed, assuring him that there was no one there. A little more than half an hour later, he entered my room again and stood at the door, motionless. When I snapped at him, he jumped back, claimed that once again that the clown was at his window and he needed my help, because apparently it wouldn't leave him alone. At this point, I was rather more pestered than frightened. I entered his room and again jokingly said, "Be gone. You're not wanted here, clown." Suddenly, however, there was loud banging at the window, which subsequently spooked my brother. The two of us hurried down the staircase. As the banging continued, our panicked voices abruptly woke my mother, who sat up in bed when the two of us entered her bedroom doorway. "What's wrong?" she asked nervously. We tried to explain the incident, but we were both breathless and too frightened to speak coherently. Instead, we dragged her across the room and demanded she come upstairs with us. And by then, however, the banging had already ended. We both explained what had happened at this point, and she gave us a worried expression. She explained to us that when she was our age, her older sister played a prank on her by hauling her down into the basement. When she had relieved herself of panic and jumped down onto the floor, a clown suddenly appeared, peeking in on her from the side window, and began murmuring softly. Shivers went through me as she told us her encounter, and to be honest, this was the first time I'd ever experienced such hopeless fear. We moved out soon afterwards. I never had any incidents again, but we were both left quite in shock. Often, we moved to a different place. It was just my parents, my big brother, and me. For me, the hardest part about all this moving was I always had to make new friends every time. I mean, yeah, I'm 15, and I try to be in sports, but it's still hard. I don't quite remember everywhere we lived. There was one town we lived in that I can remember as if it were yesterday. Let's just say I'll never look at clowns the same way again. Now, before I start, I should probably tell you, I'm actually an orphan. After my parents' death, my aunt and uncle adopted me, making my cousin more like my brother. Those are the people I'm in the care of now. The first night at the house, after I did my business, I went to my room and got in bed. After turning on the radio to my favorite station, I shut off the light and closed my eyes. But I just couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. so I sat up and looked around. There was nothing I could see. I just laid back down and closed my eyes. And suddenly, I heard something in the darkness of my room. What is that? Scratching? I got out of bed, curious to find the source. It sounded as if it were coming from the closet. I looked at it. The door itself was still. That I could see, though there was an eerie red light coming from under the door. I noticed that the scratching grew louder and the knob to the closet began to jiggle as if someone were trying to open it, but couldn't. Out of my stupid curiosity, I went to the closet and grabbed the knob. Everything suddenly stopped. I went ahead and grabbed the flashlight that I kept near my bed. I flipped it on and turned the knob. When the door burst open and blew me back against the wall, I popped up from my bed, gasping for air and breathing heavily. I put my hand on my head. It was just a dream, I thought. Then I heard this sound of crackling bones. I froze and looked over toward the closet. I saw a silhouette, just standing there, staring at me. Its eyes were like matches, and it seemed as if they were trying to look into my soul. I was so scared I literally couldn't move. Soon I built up the courage to grab the flashlight and turn it on. The figure was gone. I realized that there was a tapping outside my window. I peeked through the blinds and saw the branch next to my window. Okay. That's what was making the tapping noise, I thought. I exhaled and turned. I looked and screamed. There was a silhouette in my doorway. "Honey, are you okay?" a familiar voice said. The figure turned on the light. It was my mom. "I'm fine, Mom. It was just a nightmare." She walked to me, put her hand on my forehead. "Oh, you're burning up. Lie down and get some rest. You have school tomorrow," she said, and led me to my bed. The next few nights were exactly the same. Creaks and scratches, trembling of the closet doorknob, seeing silhouettes. It got to the point that I told my parents about it. They told me not to worry, and it was just my mind playing games with me. I thought then that, yeah, it probably was. We were completely wrong. A couple nights later, the noise began again. I decided to just try to go back to sleep, but there was something different tonight. There was whispering. That never happened before. I sat up and the whispering stopped, but instead of just lying back down, I decided to get up and check it out. I stood there motionless as I felt the warm breath on the back of my neck. I was paralyzed in fear. When I got the courage to turn, I saw a dark figure and flew back. The moonlight shining through the window had shown me a face that resembled that of a clown, except the face had blood smeared all over it. It jumped at me. I guarded my eyes. I didn't want to see that horrible, gruesome face before I died, but nothing happened. I uncovered my face and looked around. Once I was able to get up and run, I ran out my door and into the hallway. I looked around and nothing was there. I let my eyes adjust to the darkness. What I saw next was the most horrible thing I've ever witnessed. Not only did I see the clown again, but the clown was pointing up at the ceiling above me. It had a smile that I could never forget, even if I tried. And I felt a few drops of liquid fall on my head and arm. I looked up and screamed. I almost wanted to cry because what I saw on the ceiling were my parents. There were knives stabbed into my dad. There was one through his heart, his head, and his shoulders. My mom had a knife through her heart. Her mouth was sewn shut. She was being hung. I covered my eyes, horrified by the sight. I looked down. The clown was in front of me and stabbed me in the stomach. I fell back and was knocked unconscious. I woke up to the sounds of police sirens and crying. Then my aunt ran over and hugged me. I cringed in pain as she accidentally touched the wound. I asked what happened, thinking and hoping that everything I remembered was just a dream. The wound was from something else. My aunt then explained through her tears that she and my uncle would probably have to adopt me, saying how they were my godparents. That night will haunt me until I die. I don't think any human could have done what happened to my parents. That gruesome night and sight is what holds me back from ever going to a circus or carnival. My aunt and uncle think I should go to a psychiatrist, but I don't think I'm crazy. I think I saw what actually happened, because sometimes I can still feel the breath on the back of my neck and the eyes staring at me. 4 years ago today, I was 20 years old and my brother was 23. We were running around and doing a couple errands for our mother while she got dinner ready. After I grabbed a loaf of bread from the local bread shop, I ran out the door and ran into a person who fell on the ground. He whispered his apologies and ran off. I didn't get a good look at him, but he did leave an envelope lying on the ground. I'm curious. I flipped the envelope around and saw the words, "Treats for Minds," scribbled on the front. My brother, Brandon, walked up to me and said, "Open it, dude. There might be money inside." I tore the envelope open and saw a flyer and 2 tickets inside. The tickets were very plain white and black writing. Admit 1, 1384 Gainland Avenue, March 29th, 2017, 6 a.m. I let out a short laugh and walked towards the trash can, but Brandon grabbed my arm and said, "Come on, dude, this sounds interesting as hell. Let's go. It's free." He grabbed the envelope out of my hands and stuffed it in his pocket. We finished off the errands and went home around 5 p.m. that night. We ate Brandon's favorite meal, which is roast beef, creamed corn, and headed off to our rooms. I messed around on my phone before falling asleep at midnight. The next morning, I woke to my brother shaking me. I groggily swatted at him, but he grabbed my wrist and said, "Hey, it's 5:30 right now. We only have 30 minutes to get there. It's a 15-minute drive." The drive only took 5 minutes, but when we were there, we realized there was only 3 other cars parked outside. Brandon parked at the far right corner of the parking lot, and we walked up to the bright red and white striped tent. As we walked into the entrance, a man blocked our way and said, "Ticket, please." Brandon took out the tickets and handed it to him. The man took the tickets and looked at me with a grin before saying, "I knew you guys would come. Remember, do not leave until the show's over." We looked ahead and saw a white poster board that said, "Entrance," on top of what seemed like a part of the tent cut out. We walked through the crudely cut entrance, and I stopped dead in my tracks. The area was a lot bigger than I imagined. There were hundreds of bleachers all around the center stage. Nearly almost every single spot on the bleachers was filled, but we managed to find a seat after several minutes of walking around. To Brandon's disappointment, our seat was near the back. And there was a nervous chatter all around us. I tried to listen in, but their voices were far too low. Before I could attempt to get closer to eavesdrop on what they were saying, I heard music fill the room. It was unlike any music I'd ever heard before. Just a single, low note, accompanied by a flutter of 8 higher notes, filled the room. My attention instantly drew towards the middle of the area. The ground opened up, and an elephant rose up and took a couple of steps around, but it did not make a single noise until it walked up to the bleachers where we were sitting and let out what I could only describe as a scream. It pushed itself back and raised its 2 feet before slamming it back down on the people sitting in the front row. Brandon and I screamed out in terror, but everyone else in the room let out an applause and cheered for the elephant. We got up and started to run for the exit, but before we got through the first exit, the man that took our tickets blocked our way and said, "You don't want to leave. Watch the rest of the show. There are consequences if you leave. The show lasts for just 45 minutes. Just stick it out. You may love it at the end." Brandon started to cuss out the man, but I grabbed him and dragged him back to our seat. He grabbed me while I was sitting down and said, "Are you fucking crazy? People just died. We need to call the police. Shit. Tell them we're being held hostage." I grabbed my phone and made the call. The dispatcher told me that it would be a short while before the cops would arrive at the scene. By the time I hung up the phone, I looked up and saw the elephant was going back the way it had come. As the elephant sank below the ground, 3 clowns came up, and they let out a low, guttural laughter before running around and dragged 10 people on stage. The people stood proudly as the clowns started to giggle and run circles around them. And they all took out long, jagged knives and held it in the air for 3 more laps before sticking it out at the people. With slashes and gashes, all 10 of the people fell down to their knees, clutching their intestines. They gave out laughter filled with glee. The clowns ran down to the center of the stage and sank below the earth, while a man in a black tuxedo rose up from the ground. As he came out, he started to speak into a microphone. As our final act, I would like to bring a person on stage for a very special magic trick. He closed his eyes and turned around 3 times before pointing his finger directly at Brandon. Everyone stared at Brandon, including me. He looked at me before saying, "Fuck this," and ran as quick as he could through the entrance. After a couple seconds, I chased after him. Before I got close to the exit, I saw my brother being dragged back by the man that took our tickets. I tried to rip Brandon away from the man's grasp, but he pushed me to the ground and tossed Brandon like a rag doll towards the middle of the stage. By the time I looked up, the magician held Brandon over his head. The sounds of cheering from the crowd filled the audience and the entire area. I closed my eyes for a second while I got back up to my feet. By the time I opened my eyes, Brandon's body was split in two. The magician was holding half of his body in each hand. The crowd cheered loudly as I sat back down on the ground, defeated and helpless. I closed my eyes and held them shut until I heard my name being said by a familiar voice. It was Brandon's. I quickly got up and ran to him when I saw him, but when I tried to put my hand on his shoulder, it passed right through him. I heard a cough come from behind me. It was the man who took our tickets. He gave a weak smile before saying, "I'm sorry, your brother wasn't strong enough. He will stay with us now. Don't worry. You can still visit him once a year when we come back for a show." Every time the show is back in our town, I made sure to grab a front row seat at the same bleachers Brandon and I once sat at. And this year, I made the decision. After 4 years of going to the circus, this will be the year that I finally join my brother. This is the year I join the circus.